I never imagined I would be told to gather my belongings in the very home I helped bring to life, but that's where I found myself. I was standing in my bare feet on the cool marble of the foyer in my own Palm Beach house, looking at my daughter-in-law, Chloe, and some self-satisfied man in an ill-fitting suit clutching a briefcase. Her arms were folded across her chest, her mouth forming a smirk that never quite managed to reach her eyes. "We've already finalized the agreement. You should pack your things, Dad," Chloe said, her voice dripping with a syrupy, sickening sweetness. Then she brandished a thick manila folder in front of my face as if she were shooing away an insect. "New ownership. You're currently trespassing." My posture stiffened. "I beg your pardon." The man standing next to her remained silent. He simply opened his briefcase and produced a thick stack of documents. "The property now belongs to Mr. and Mrs. Robert and Chloe Sterling, as per the signed agreement. You are required to vacate the premises within 72 hours. I didn't budge. I didn't even flinch. I just stared at that name, Robert Sterling, printed starkly on that fraudulent document. My son. My only child. I vividly remember the thought crossing my mind. So this is how it ends. Not with a dramatic confrontation, not with shouting matches, but with a cheap briefcase and a forged signature. Chloe's smile broadened, as if she were savoring a joke only she was privy to. "You really should have allowed me to manage the household finances sooner, Arthur. None of this would have been necessary if you had just let us assist you. You're not really in a condition to oversee a property of this magnitude." She gestured toward my dressing gown, as if I were some senile old fool who had wandered downstairs in a state of confusion. I had just finished my morning meditation. It was 7:45 in the morning. I hadn't even had my coffee. "You must be delusional if you believe for a second that I signed any document like this," I stated, my voice eerily calm, too calm, even for my own ears. "Oh, but you did," she replied, with a display of feigned concern. "Months ago. Have you forgotten?" I looked her directly in the eye, and in that instant, I knew this was a calculated move. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision or some misunderstanding. They had been circling me for months, like buzzards, just waiting for the opportune moment to pick me clean. Robert wasn't even there. Of course, he wasn't. He sent her. He always sends her. He lacks the fortitude to face me himself. I raised him to be better than this. Or so I had thought. I strode past them both, walked directly to the papers, and lifted the top sheet. A single glance was all it took. The signature at the bottom was a shaky, distorted imitation of my own, but it was not mine. It looked as if it had been traced. "You've made a grave error," I said, handing the document back to the man. "You will be hearing from my attorney." Chloe's expression shifted. There was no fear, no regret, just a flicker of irritation, as if she were being inconvenienced by a particularly stubborn weed in her garden. "Oh, Arthur," she cooed softly, "you're not nearly as clever as you believe. Just take your little meditation cushion and try to leave with some dignity." I offered no response. I didn't shout or break down. I simply turned, walked back up the grand staircase, and shut the door to my bedroom. And in the ensuing silence, I allowed the reality of the situation to settle in. They genuinely believed they had shattered me. They thought I would retreat quietly. They were mistaken. Terribly, terribly mistaken. By the time I came back downstairs, they had vanished. The front door was left slightly ajar. The cloying scent of Chloe's perfume lingered in the hallway like an unwelcome ghost. I closed it softly, then deliberately turned the deadbolt, the click echoing with finality. She would not cross that threshold again without a court order. The house was quiet once more, almost unnervingly so. I went into the solarium and threw open the windows, inviting in the salty ocean breeze. I needed to clear my head. It's not that I was surprised. Not truly. Disappointed? Absolutely. Betrayed? Beyond a shadow of a doubt. But surprised? Not in the least. You see, I have lived on this estate for 34 years. My late wife Eleanor and I purchased this land back when Palm Beach was still a modest, unassuming place. She designed the gardens with her own hands before cancer claimed those same hands from me just after her 59th birthday. Since her passing, I've lived here alone, and I preferred it that way. It was peaceful, predictable. Robert began to drift away the moment Chloe appeared on the scene. She was sophisticated, ambitious, always hovering a little too close to my late wife's jewelry box, but never quite daring to touch. I maintained my distance. I believed that if I remained polite and respected their space, they would extend the same courtesy to me. I was wrong. They visited infrequently, mostly on holidays. And even then, they were always in a hurry, always finding a reason to depart before the coffee was served. I never pushed the issue, never tried to make them feel guilty. I mistakenly thought that giving them space was a form of love. But I've since learned that space is only an act of love when it's mutually desired. When it's one-sided, it is simply abandonment. And when it's exploited, as it was now, it becomes a trap. I sat at the breakfast table, the morning sun casting long stripes of light across the tiled floor. My coffee had grown cold upstairs, so I brewed a fresh pot, dark roast. It helped steady my nerves. I sat in silence, letting the warmth of the mug seep into my palms. Chloe's words echoed in my mind. You're not really in a condition to oversee a property of this magnitude. It wasn't just a falsehood. It was a well-rehearsed line. They were constructing a narrative, a story in which I was too old, too confused, too vulnerable to understand what was happening around me. It explained her sudden burst of kindness in recent months, the unexpected deliveries of my favorite cigars, the persistent offers to manage my mail, the home assistant she insisted on installing. She called it a gift. I saw it for what it was, a listening device. I had played along, letting her believe she was outsmarting me, because that is what happens when you age quietly. People mistake your stillness for weakness, but they seem to have forgotten who raised Robert, who taught him how to balance a budget, how to compose a cover letter, how to survive. When Eleanor died, and we had nothing but lint in our savings account and a sliver of hope in the pantry, they forgot that I built this house twice, once with my wife's loving hands, and again with my own broken heart. And I was not about to let some silver-tongued manipulator and her spineless accomplice walk in and take it away from me. I finished my coffee and retrieved my old leather-bound notebook, the one I kept tucked away behind the spice rack in the kitchen. It was filled with notes, names, and observations. If they wanted to play a game, they had chosen the wrong man to play against. It began with the utility bill. Chloe had offered to set up an automatic payment system just to simplify things for me. I remember the moment with perfect clarity. We were sitting in the garden. I was tending to the roses, and she was sipping an iced tea she hadn't bothered to refill herself. You shouldn't have to trouble yourself with things like this anymore, Arthur, she had said, smoothly taking the bill from the table as if it were a burden too great for me to bear. You've done more than enough. Let us carry some of the load now. She made it sound so endearing, like the caring gesture of a devoted daughter. I didn't resist, not because I trusted her, but because I wanted to observe her more closely. People reveal their true intentions not in what they offer, but in what they expect in return. Then came the second move, a sleek white box she delivered without any warning. It's a smart hub, she announced with a smile. as if the term itself offered comfort. I've already set it up. Now you can just say what you need, and it will remind you. Appointments, grocery lists, your medications. Robert says it will help you stay organized. I never asked for it. I never even plugged it in. Instead, I flipped it over and discovered the microphone was already active, linked to an account registered with Robert's email address. They weren't even being subtle. They wanted to create a narrative of a frail old man succumbing to senility. Harmless at first, then a danger to himself, and finally, completely unfit. Then they could swoop in as the saviors, the guardians, the new owners. I let them believe I was falling for their charade. They started visiting more frequently after that. Chloe would appear on Saturdays, offering to sort through my mail. Robert would drop by during the week, offering to help with small repairs around the house, though he never actually fixed anything. One Sunday, she brought over a stack of envelopes and casually inserted a bank authorization form halfway through the pile. I feigned ignorance. She even had a pen at the ready. I simply smiled, handed the form back to her, and said I would review everything after my nap. She retracted the pen with a flick of her wrist, an expression of annoyance she tried to disguise as concern. They were testing me, seeing how far they could push before I push back, like serpents basking in the sun before they strike. But I was watching their every move, noting every misstep. I wasn't being naive. I was waiting for the moment they would finally drop the pretense. And that moment arrived this morning, with that smug man and his folder full of lies. They thought I was too old to put up a fight, too polite to refuse, too isolated to resist. But what they failed to understand is that this solitude sharpens a man like me. Every quiet day, every insult I chose to ignore, every boundary I maintained, despite their smiling manipulations, it all forged something solid within me. They thought I was letting them win. No, I was simply giving them enough rope. And now, they were beginning to tighten the noose around their own necks. The printer whirred to life at 2:17 a.m. That was the thing that broke the silence. Not some grand revelation, not a dramatic confrontation, just a tired old machine in the hallway that had sat dormant for days. Suddenly, it churned to life, as if it had something of great importance to communicate. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't printed anything since last week's grocery list. I rose from my bed in the darkness, still clad in my cotton robe, my slippers making no sound against the hardwood floor. The paper tray had caught a single sheet, half spilled and face down. I slid it out, turned it over, and read the heading. Preliminary Sale Agreement, Sterling Estate, Palm Beach. It was my address, my estate. My name was on the top line as the seller, and their names, Robert Sterling and Chloe Sterling, were on the buyer line. I didn't panic. I didn't shed a tear. I walked back to the kitchen, switched on the light, and laid the page on the counter, as if it were a piece of evidence in a courtroom, because that's exactly what it was. The signature was supposed to be mine, but it wasn't. I recognized the handwriting, or rather, the poor attempt at it. Someone had copied it clumsily. It was just convincing enough to fool someone who didn't know my signature well, but not me. There was no power of attorney mentioned, no notary seal, just this half-baked fraudulent document they assumed no one would ever question because they never thought I would see it. They must have sent the print job remotely, probably through that ridiculous smart hub Chloe had given me. I had never connected it, but the app was undoubtedly still installed on her phone. She must have tried to sync it with the network and forgotten that I still controlled the Wi-Fi. I picked up the paper. My hand was steady. They had already drafted the contract, which meant they had been in contact with a realtor. This implied that someone else had likely already seen this document, which meant time was running out. I opened my laptop and typed in the name of the firm printed at the bottom of the page, L. Sanford Realty, LLC. There it was, a bland but upscale website, filled with photos of palm-lined properties and multi-million-dollar mansions. I clicked through the listings until I saw it. Coming soon, legacy property in historic Palm Beach. There were no photos, just a placeholder and a banner that read, "Serious inquiries only." But it was enough. They hadn't just fantasized about stealing my home. They had already put their plan into motion. And still, a part of me searched for an explanation, for a reason. Maybe Chloe had misunderstood something. Maybe Robert wasn't aware of the full extent of her actions. But then I saw the agent's contact information. I recognized the name, John Mercer, Robert's old roommate from university. The one who had crashed on our guest couch for a summer after graduation. The one I had fed for 3 weeks while he tried to figure out his life. So no, Robert knew. Robert was leading the charge. My son hadn't just betrayed me. He had orchestrated the entire theft from beginning to end. I folded the paper with care and tucked it under the spice rack, next to my leather-bound notebook. Let them continue to print their lies. I was done collecting clues. It was time to start gathering ammunition. The poker club met every Thursday. To an outsider, it was just a group of retirees shuffling cards and arguing over hands. But to me, it had become my quiet sanctuary. Familiar faces, predictable laughter, and more importantly, sharp minds with long memories. That morning, I wore my old tweed jacket, the one with the suede elbow patches and deep pockets. Not for warmth, but for concealment. I tucked the fraudulent sale agreement inside, sandwiched between my notepad and a tin of mints. "Arthur?" Henry waved as I walked in. He always occupied the same chair, a creature of habit. "You brought those Cuban cigars again, I hope?" "Of course," I smiled. "Some things you can always rely on." They didn't ask what was troubling me. They didn't have to. It was written all over my face, the kind of forced smile you wear to a funeral you can't admit is your own. I waited until after the first round of cards. I waited until the clinking of glasses and the rustle of snack bags could mask the hushed tone of my voice. "Henry," I said, looking at my old friend seated across from me. "You used to practice estate law, didn't you?" He looked up from his cards slowly. Henry hadn't set foot in a courtroom in 5 years, but he still read the newspaper with a pen in hand, instinctively correcting legal jargon like it was muscle memory. "I did. Why do you ask?" "I found something," I said, sliding the paper across the felt table as if it were nothing more than a grocery list. "Tell me if this means what I think it means." He read it in silence, then read it again, exhaling slowly through his nose. "Did you sign this?" he asked without looking up. "No." He turned to the final page, his brow furrowing like wrinkled linen. "No notary seal, no witnesses. And this signature," he tapped it once, "is a photocopy, probably traced. You said you didn't sign it." "I didn't even know it existed until it materialized in my printer at 2 in the morning. Henry's lips thinned into a hard line. "Then this isn't a contract, Arthur. It's a felony." My other friend Frank stopped mid-sip of his drink. "Henry, it's forgery," he said firmly. "And if they've already shown this to a realtor or submitted it as part of a sale process..." "They have," I interjected, and then I told them everything. The smart device, the feigned concern, the sudden access to my bills, the sneaky forms, the listing on Sanford Realty, even Robert's old roommate. By the time I had finished, no one was paying attention to the game anymore. Henry nodded. "You are still the legal owner of the property, Arthur. They have nothing. But you can't afford to wait. You need to get ahead of this, and you need to do it fast." I slid the agreement back into my pocket. "Can you help?" "I don't practice anymore, but I know someone who does. A friend of mine, he's smart, quiet, and doesn't get rattled when people lie. Then, I would like to meet him, I said. For the first time in days, I felt something solid in my chest. Not peace, not yet, but resolve. Something hard and heavy that anchored me to the ground. They wanted me gone, stripped of my assets, silenced, and swept away like dust. But dust settles. I don't. The first time Chloe brought me flowers, I was suspicious. It was 6 months ago, on a Tuesday. Pale hydrangeas, blue and white, their petals crinkled at the edges, as if they had been mishandled during the car ride. She held them out to me like a peace offering. "I just wanted to check in," she said, her voice all honey and her face all dimples. "See how you're feeling. Robert was so worried about you after your last checkup." The last checkup. That's what this was all about. 3 weeks prior, my cardiologist had called with the results of my stress test. All clear. A phrase so weighty, it landed on my kitchen table like a ton of bricks. I told no one, not even Robert. I wanted a moment to breathe, to process the good news before they turned it into a spectacle. But someone had told them. Probably the nurse I had once listed as an emergency contact back when my condition made it difficult to drive. And Chloe, she made it her personal mission to help from that moment on. Not when I was ill, but when I got better. That was the difference. That was the problem. You would think a clean bill of health would be a cause for relief, for celebration, perhaps even for bringing the family closer. But what I received was a daughter-in-law with a new sense of urgency in her step, asking to review my will, offering to digitize my estate records, suggesting simpler living arrangements. She had been expecting me to decline, counting on it even. That's when she started insinuating herself into my routines, offering to pay my bills, inquiring about emergency access to my accounts, pretending to be worried about my future when, in reality, she was shocked I still had one. I saw it with perfect clarity. They were planning for an inheritance, not for my recovery. And now, with the house still in my name and my health no longer in question, I had become an inconvenience. Once again, they didn't want to care for me. They wanted to collect on me. So, I decided to give them just enough rope. I played their game. I let Chloe sort my mail, hover over me during doctor's appointments, and talk about what's next with that glossy smile that barely concealed her frustration. I even nodded along when she started referring to my study as a lot to maintain for a man your age. Then one day last month, she looked at the grand dining room and said, half joking, half mocking, "You should really consider selling, Arthur. Something simpler, maybe a condo by the marina." I just smiled and replied, "That's an interesting thought." She thought I was softening. She mistook my manners for surrender. That has always been her fatal flaw, confusing silence with submission. But what she didn't know was that every visit, every suggestion, every conversation was being meticulously catalogued, written down, and cross-referenced. I even began to record our dinners, just in case, all perfectly legal, all within the confines of my own home. Because if they were going to cast me as the victim in their story, they had better be prepared for a plot twist. They wanted a helpless old man, one they could pity and push aside. What they got instead was a survivor with a file of his own. So, I made a decision that evening, sipping my tea by the bay windows. I wouldn't just defend my house. I would make it my battlefield. I invited them to dinner. Chloe accepted instantly, almost too eagerly. She suggested I make my famous steak. Robert offered to bring a bottle of wine. I told them not to bother. "I have a few things I'd like to say," I added with a smile. "It's time we discussed the next steps." That phrase, next steps, was like catnip to her. I could hear it in the silence that followed on the phone. "Absolutely, Arthur," she said. "It's important that we all feel secure." Secure. What she meant was me finally giving up the deed. I set the table as I always did. Linen napkins, heavy silverware, the china with the navy rim that Eleanor and I had bought during our first year in Palm Beach. They arrived 10 minutes late. Chloe was in a pale green dress that seemed a size too small. Robert was wearing a shirt he used to wear to business meetings when he still believed in having a career instead of coasting on mine. I greeted them with a warmth that concealed a hammer behind my back. Dinner was salmon and asparagus light. Civilized. I poured their wine, declined any for myself, and waited for them to start digging their own graves. Chloe was the first to take the bait. "So, when you mentioned next steps," I tilted my head as if deep in thought. "Yes, I've been thinking about legacy a lot lately, and what it means to transition gracefully." Robert shifted in his seat. I could almost see the fantasy playing out behind his eyes. A beachfront condo, new title paperwork, maybe a splashy feature in some real estate magazine. Generous father-in-law, hands over beloved estate. "I know how much this house means to you both," I continued, setting my fork down gently. "I've been reflecting on my options." Chloe leaned in, her eyes glittering with a hunger she mistook for charm. "And I'm not quite ready to hand over full control," I said slowly, watching her smile falter. "But I would like to explore a managed transition, something that would be mutually beneficial." Robert looked confused. Chloe recovered quickly. "Of course, that's very fair of you. What kind of arrangement are you considering?" I took a breath and let the moment hang in the air. "Well," I said, "I would like to retain residence rights, naturally, and have oversight of any financial activities related to the property." Chloe's lips tightened just enough to betray her true feelings. "Naturally, I would also like to keep all home-related accounts in my name. Bills, maintenance, insurance." "That's understandable," Robert offered, clearly unsure of where the trap was. Chloe, however, couldn't help herself. "Arthur," she said, her voice dipping into that soft, condescending tone she thought sounded persuasive, "you've always been very independent. But managing a property of this size, it's not getting any easier. We just want to help." I smiled and lifted my phone from beneath my placemat, tapping the screen. The red circle blinked, recording. "Oh, I appreciate that," I said. "I know how deeply invested you are in my well-being." Chloe went pale. "You've been so helpful lately," I added, my voice steady. "In fact, I was just thinking, maybe we could go over everything you've done so far for my records." She didn't answer. Robert looked at her, then back at me, the realization slowly dawning on him. The rest of the dinner was quiet, but I already had everything I needed on tape. The first thing I noticed was the silence. It was too quiet for a home that usually creaked with the weight of memory. No classical music from the stereo, no gurgling of the coffee pot, just the dull thud of cardboard boxes hitting the hardwood floor. I walked in through the garage door and stopped dead in the hallway. Men in matching navy polo shirts were in my living room, stacking boxes and rolling up rugs. My television was leaning awkwardly against the dining room table. The portrait of Eleanor and me, which had hung above the mantel for decades, was gone. "Excuse me," I said sharply, though my voice remained steady. "What is going on here?" Chloe turned from the kitchen, a clipboard in her hand, as if she were conducting inventory at a warehouse. Her eyes widened with mock surprise, not guilt. "Oh, Arthur, I didn't expect you back so soon. I was gone for less than an hour. A trip to the pharmacy for vitamin D and some low-sodium crackers." I clutched the paper bag tightly in my hand, tighter than I had realized. "Do you want to tell me why strangers are packing up my house?" She took a slow, deliberate breath, adopting that patronizing voice, the one reserved for difficult neighbors and misbehaving children. "Arthur, this is what we discussed. Don't you remember?" "I remember dinner and manipulation. What I don't remember is authorizing a move." She approached me as if I were some wounded animal that needed to be calmed. "You've been forgetting things lately. The papers, the bank statements. It's okay. It happens. We've spoken to a professional who can help." I laughed. Not a loud, bitter laugh, but a cold one. "So your plan was to gaslight me, steal my house, and call it caregiving?" "Arthur," she said softly, "we only want what's best for you. Robert and we're worried. You've been under a lot of stress." I turned slowly. One of the movers, a young man, barely 20, froze mid-step with a lamp in his hands. "Put it down," I said quietly. He obeyed instantly. Chloe tried to smile again. "I know this is overwhelming, but we've made all the arrangements. There's a lovely residential care community in Delray. Ocean views, daily activities. They'll even manage your medications." "And who exactly authorized this?" I asked. "You?" She held up a sheet of paper as if it were a sacred text. "You did, last month. You signed this during your follow-up with Dr. Berger. It grants me temporary authority." "I never saw that form." "You did. You just probably don't remember." There it was, the final nail in the coffin. She wasn't just trying to take my house. She was attempting to rewrite the story of my mind, painting me as incapable and incompetent. I stepped forward, close enough to smell her perfume. "Let me be perfectly clear. I am of sound mind. I have legal proof of ownership. I have witnesses, and I have audio recordings. If you or your hired help move another single item in this house, I will call the police and press charges for trespassing." She blinked once, then smiled again, but this time it wavered. "You're making this much harder than it needs to be. And you," I said calmly, "have made the mistake of underestimating me." She hesitated, then turned and whispered something to the movers. They began to retreat, for now, but I knew they would be back. And the next time, so would my lawyer. I made the call calmly. No panic, no shouting, just a measured, even voice. "This is Arthur Sterling. I'd like to report unauthorized persons inside my home." The dispatcher took my address and said they would send a unit. By the time the police cruiser pulled into the driveway, Chloe was back in the foyer, arms crossed, her lips curled into her signature smirk. "You're overreacting." The movers were gone, probably paid to disappear at the first sign of flashing lights. 2 officers stepped out of the car. They were young, polite, with the clipped confidence of men who were trained to handle noise complaints and family disputes, not property fraud. "Sir, we received a call," the taller one began. "Yes," I said. "I'm the homeowner. I returned to find this woman and hired workers moving my property without my permission." Chloe cut in. "He's confused. I'm his daughter-in-law. We have a care arrangement. He's been forgetting things lately." I held up my phone. "Officer, I have audio recordings of our last dinner conversation. I have video footage from my security camera of the movers entering my home. And I have this." I pulled out the fake sale agreement, a forged contract they've been using. They glanced at the paper. Chloe remained quiet now, a smart move on her part. The shorter officer took a few notes. "Sir," he said carefully, "do you have anything that shows you own the house?" I nodded. "The original deed, title insurance, utility bills in my name." "Would you like to see them?" He nodded. I left them in the living room and returned with a folder I kept in my safe. They flipped through the documents quickly. Chloe didn't even pretend to be interested anymore. "Okay," the taller officer said finally. Here's the situation. This isn't technically a criminal matter at this point. There was no physical force, no clear theft. But then he looked at Chloe. If you are acting without a power of attorney, without legal authority, you may be opening yourself up to significant civil liability. Chloe crossed her arms tighter. We were only trying to help. He's been deteriorating. Then he can get a medical evaluation, the officer replied. Until then, you cannot make those decisions for him. I will be contacting my lawyer, I added. You will receive formal notification shortly. He nodded. That's your right. They took down our names, said they would file a report in case things escalated, and advised me to install new locks and consider a security system. Chloe stood there the entire time, her eyes burning holes into the floor. Once the officers had left, she turned to me as if we were in the middle of a friendly misunderstanding. Arthur, this is getting out of hand. No, I said. This is me taking it back into my hands. She stepped forward, then thought better of it. You're being paranoid, she hissed. You'll regret pushing us away. I tilted my head. I regret letting you this close. Then I opened the door. Leave, she did. And I didn't breathe again until the sound of her car's engine faded down the driveway. I stood in the silence, not afraid, not shaking, just acutely aware of how close they had come, of how far I had let them in. But that door, it wouldn't be opening for them again, not without serious consequences. The locks were changed by noon the next day. The locksmith, a quiet man with a scar running down his forearm, didn't ask any questions. He worked quickly and professionally, pausing only to nod when I said, "No spares for family." When he left, I stood by the front door and turned the new deadbolt twice. Click, click. It sounded final. Good. Then I made the second call, the one that truly mattered. "Sterling?" A familiar voice answered on the fourth ring. "I wasn't expecting a call from you, Marcus," I said. "Do you still handle estate litigation?" He paused, but not for long. "Of course. You need representation." I told him everything. I didn't sugarcoat it. I didn't downplay my own oversight to sound less foolish. Just the unvarnished truth. Sharp, dry, and unapologetic. By the time I finished, Marcus was silent on the other end of the line. Then he cleared his throat and said, "Send me copies of the sale agreement, any audio recordings you have, and photographs of the moving activity. We're filing for an injunction." "An injunction?" "An immediate court order to prevent them from making any claims on the property," he explained. "Once it's in place, they are legally barred from listing it, negotiating its sale, or misrepresenting ownership in any way." I felt my spine lengthen. "What else can I do?" "We'll also file a cease and desist. It will stop any further assistance from Chloe. And I would strongly recommend you begin the paperwork for a restraining order. Even a temporary one makes a powerful statement. I want to file it." "Then we will." That afternoon, I printed everything. The forged contract, the transcript of Chloe's scripted voice from our dinner, subtly pressuring me, a photo I had snapped on my phone of the movers hauling out my chest of drawers. All of it. I hand-delivered the file to Marcus's office. Not because I didn't trust email, but because I wanted to see the look on his face when he opened the folder. He didn't disappoint. "Good Lord," he muttered, leafing through the pages. "They really thought they'd get away with this?" "No," I said. "They were counting on me not fighting back." He looked at me for a moment, then nodded. "They miscalculated." Outside, the sky was gray, thick with the weight of summer, but there was no rain. I walked back to my car with a steadiness I hadn't felt in years. That night, I moved the leather-bound notebook from behind the spice rack to the safe. They weren't going to gaslight me again. They weren't going to walk through my doors and pretend it was still years ago, that I was some soft-handed man begging to stay relevant. This wasn't about property anymore, or inheritance, or even betrayal. This was about war and dignity, and showing them what it costs to corner someone who has spent his life building everything they are now trying to steal. The line had been drawn, and I was done pretending it was all just a misunderstanding. The room still smelled of her. Old books, dried lavender, and a hint of the sandalwood perfume she always wore. Eleanor's study hadn't changed in over a decade. I kept it clean, preserved, a sacred space. But that morning, I walked in not to remember, but to prepare. Her reading glasses were still on the desk, next to a collection of poetry, a page marked with a faded ribbon. I stood there for a long time, just looking at it. Eleanor used to say this room was where she made sense of the world, that even when her body began to fail her, this space kept her mind sharp and intact. Quietly, with a newfound resolve, I sat down in the leather chair by the window. The leather was cracked from years of sun, but the seat still felt warm, somehow familiar. I ran my fingers along the edge of the armrest, just as I used to run them along her jawline. Then I spoke to her aloud. "They came for the house, Eleanor." My voice didn't shake. "They thought I would just let them take it. That grief and age had left me soft." Outside, the garden buzzed with the sounds of summer. The hedges were a little too thick, the roses a little wild. I hadn't trimmed them this week. For once, it didn't feel like a failure. It felt like defiance. "I'm not broken," I whispered, "but I am angry." It wasn't the kind of anger that explodes. Not loud, not erratic. It was cold, measured, the kind of fury that waits patiently for its turn. That night, after I had finished my tea, I opened Eleanor's old filing cabinet for the first time in years. Among tax folders and property maps was something I hadn't seen since 2004, a small cassette recorder. I picked it up. The buttons still clicked with a solid, heavy feel in my hand. I placed it on the desk next to my smartphone, a relic beside a weapon. Then I began to write, not just legal statements, but a personal ledger. Every moment they had trespassed, lied, and manipulated. Chloe's condescending voice in the dinner recordings. Robert's cowardly silence on every phone call. Every single, "we just want what's best for you," laced with entitlement. I wrote until midnight, then until 2 in the morning. When I finally stopped, I had 10 pages of facts, dates, quotes, and reactions. Not for the court, but for me. Because before I could expose their lies, I needed to light a fire inside myself. Rage didn't consume me. It carved me into something new. By morning, I had turned that rage into something precise. I opened my notebook one last time and underlined the final entry. They loved what I had, but they never loved who I was. I tore that page out and taped it to the refrigerator, like a promise, like a battle cry. I invited her over again, just her. No Robert this time. "Let's finish our talk," I said over the phone. "About the house." She didn't hesitate. "Of course. Just us, right?" I could hear the gloating tone tucked inside her voice. She thought I had folded. I wore my softest sweater and combed my hair back neatly. No pretense. Just enough perceived fragility to bait her deeper into the trap. I even opened a bottle of the Merlot she liked, the one she used to snatch from my wine cabinet during family dinners. The doorbell rang at 11, 3 a.m., right on time. Chloe swept in with a confident smile, her faux concern barely cloaking her glee. "You look good, Arthur. Have you been sleeping better?" I poured her a glass. "Better? Yes. More decisive." We sat in the sunroom, the white curtains casting soft shadows over her manicured lies. Her fingers circled the wine glass lazily. I spoke gently. nudging her deeper into her favorite delusion, that she was in control. "I've been thinking," I said, "about the transition. Maybe it's time I considered some offers." Chloe's eyes lit up. "Really? That's so wise of you?" I watched her reaction, the sudden glint of avarice, the flicker of calculation in her eyes. "I've spoken with a few people," she went on quickly. "There's real interest in the property. Discreet interest." "Oh," I said, my voice syrupy sweet. "Like who?" She took the bait. "John Mercer," she said smoothly. "You remember him, right? From Robert's university days. He's a broker now. He already has 2 potential buyers lined up. International clients, very exclusive. We could close in weeks." She sipped her wine, leaning back, comfortable, completely unaware. "Just imagine," she continued, "you could move somewhere simple, peaceful, and we'll take care of everything. Renovations, showings, contracts. You won't have to lift a finger." "And how do you plan to explain the forged documents?" I asked, watching her freeze mid-swallow. Her smile twitched, then returned, just barely. "Forged? I'm not sure what you mean." "Oh, I think you do," I said. "The fake signature, the unauthorized listings, the temporary authorization form. I never signed. I have it all." Chloe blinked once, then twice. And then, behind her, the guest room door creaked open. Marcus stepped out, dressed in a crisp navy suit, a recorder in his hand. Chloe's face drained of all color. "Who the hell is that?" "My attorney," I said simply. "He's been listening for the last 20 minutes. You tricked me." "No," I said, standing up. "You tricked yourself. You came into my house, lied about my health, tried to take everything I built, and now you've confessed on tape to manipulating sale negotiations on a property you do not own." Marcus didn't speak. He didn't need to. The look on Chloe's face, a mixture of rage, swallowed by the bitter taste of realization, said it all. I took one slow step toward her. "Leave, Chloe, and take your delusions with you." She stood there, shaking slightly. "Robert will hear about this." "Oh," I said. "He already has his own chapter in the file. The wire transfers. I found them too." She looked from Marcus to me, then, without another word, turned and walked out. I closed the door behind her and locked it. Then I turned to Marcus. "Send the tape to the judge." I didn't call her back. I didn't argue, didn't text, didn't reach out for some sense of closure. I let the silence speak for me. 3 days passed without a word. Chloe must have sensed that something was coming. Maybe it was the tone of my voice or the way Marcus never blinked while she stammered through her denials, but she didn't contact me. She knew better now. Instead, I let a legal envelope do the talking. Marcus delivered it himself, hand to hand, outside the gates of their manicured community where reputation mattered more than love. Chloe opened it right there on the curb, dressed in gym clothes and sunglasses that were too large for her thin, pinched face. Inside was a cease and desist order, a fraud lawsuit, and a notarized notice informing her that the deed to my house was intact. The fraudulent contract was void, and the broker she had whispered about was now under investigation. I wasn't there. I didn't need to be. But I imagined the moment. The flash of pale disbelief, the realization that her whispered deals and fake signatures had not led to riches, but to legal charges. What I was present for was the knock on my door 2 hours later. Robert. He looked smaller, not just thinner, but hollow, as if someone had finally turned off the spotlight he had been standing under for years. "Dad," he said, his voice cracking. "We need to talk." I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. "No," I said. He blinked. Please, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. I cut in. I understand that you let her into this family, and then you stood by while she tried to steal it. He flinched. She just got in too deep, we thought. You thought I would roll over. You thought that grief and age had made me weak. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again. Chloe's not okay. She didn't mean. She meant every word, I said, my voice steady. And now she has none. From my pocket, I pulled out a small stack of documents, just one for him, a trust amendment. This removes you both from the family trust, I said, handing it to him. Effective immediately. He looked at the document as if it might burn him. You're cutting me out? No, I said. You cut yourself out. I'm just making it official. For a moment I saw something in his eyes. Grief, maybe, or shame, but it passed too quickly to matter. You'll regret this, he muttered, his eyes cast low. No, I replied. I regretted letting it get this far. He turned, walked to his car, and didn't look back. I stood at the top of the steps until he was gone. Then I went back inside, closed the door, and sat in the silence of my still mine house. No shouting, no fury, just paper, ink, and the truth, doing the job that fists never could. I didn't expect him to come back the next morning, but he did, pounding on the front door like a landlord reclaiming a property, as if he hadn't just been erased from the trust, as if rage could somehow rewrite legal documents. I opened the door just far enough to look him in the eye. Don't do this, I said. It's over. He didn't hear me, or he wouldn't. You think this makes you strong, filing papers, cutting me off? That's not strength. That's spite. I leaned against the doorframe. Spite would have been pressing charges for conspiracy. This is restraint. His face was red, not from the heat, but from panic. His hands kept moving into his pockets, back out, rubbing his forehead. He wasn't angry. He was exposed. You're blowing this all out of proportion, he said. It was just a transition plan. We were trying to secure the future. You forged documents. She didn't mean for it to go that far. You stood by. I snapped, my voice sharp now. You let her lie. You let her pack my life into cartons and whisper to strangers that I was losing my mind. He looked down. I was trying to protect our future. No, I said. You were trying to shortcut your way to a comfortable life. He didn't answer. I stepped back inside and returned with another folder, this one thinner, with a single sheet on top. Recognize these? I asked, flipping it around so he could read it. His eyes scanned the page, and then froze. Those wire transfers, Chloe thought I wouldn't notice. Commission payments to John Mercer, hidden under consulting codes. Yes, I found them. Filed under project support. It would have been clever if you had been laundering cash, not an inheritance. His lips parted. I trusted you, I said softly. And you treated me like a placeholder. He took a breath. Dad, don't, I warned. Don't say my name like it still means something to you. You gave up that right. The wind stirred. The old oak tree by the driveway rustled softly, a sound I had once loved when I was rocking a young Robert to sleep in the nursery upstairs. The sound of calm. Now it felt like a warning. I never stopped loving you, he muttered. That's the problem, I said. You loved what I gave you, not who I was. He stepped back as if I had struck him, but I didn't flinch. I remained in the doorway, steady and calm. You have both been removed from every legal connection to this house. The trust, the will, the accounts. You are now officially nothing more than my son. By biology, not by behavior. His eyes darted around. He was unraveling, hope draining from him like blood from a wound. "This is wrong," he whispered. "No," I said. "It's overdue." Then I handed him a photograph, one from my security camera. Chloe, waving around the forged deed in my foyer. "Give this to your lawyer," I said. "You're going to need one." I didn't slam the door when I shut it. I didn't need to.